Happy Monday, everyone. I'm so glad you've made it to the start of a new week and the start of another round of Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. So pull up a chair by the fire, get comfortable, get something warm to drink, and sit with me while we discuss some great stories from yours truly, Dr. Plague. Today's theme will be Visions of a Strange World, and I've got 5 stories that I think fit that criteria fairly well. Our first story takes us to the scene of a strange accident and some even stranger visions. So, let's experience what it might be like to sleep with one eye open. It was an accident. It could have happened to anyone, which makes me wonder why it had to happen to me. I've worked construction for years. I've never so much as gotten a deep cut or broke a bone. Bruises sometimes, minor cuts. Nothing that stopped me from coming in the next day, though. It was just a typical day, really. I was performing an inspection, chatting with a buddy on a side job, and listening to the sound of an active construction site as it thrummed around me. Insurance would try to prove that I hadn't been wearing my safety gear, but I had witnesses that could attest that I'd been wearing my goggles, my hard hat, and my OSHA-approved gear when it happened. The drug test they had submitted me to showed I had nothing stronger in my system than the bagel I'd had for breakfast. It wasn't the fault of anyone besides whoever attached the rebar to that girder, I suppose. Even then, it wasn't really the welder's fault. It had simply come loose and stood there, waiting for me to get careless. On that day, I turned suddenly as I was inspecting an area of the basement, when a jutting piece of rebar, which I had made note of 1,000 times, pierced my safety goggles and stabbed right into my left eye. The members of my crew found me on the floor of the basement as I started to scream. The piece of rebar had gone through my goggles due to a slight fracture in the lens. That, plus my forward momentum, had caused the lens to break and my eye to be punctured. The rebar, as it happens, had been covered in dust. The dust caused the cut to become infected with a virulent strain of bacteria and ultimately required the removal of my eye. I tell you all this to explain how I came to be in a hospital bed, minus an eye, and strapped to the bed as soon as I finish writing this, since they fear I might be a danger to myself. But that's getting a little ahead of the story, I guess. It started the first night after I lost my eye. I'd been rushed to the ER right away, and the prognosis had been bad almost at once. There was definitely damage. There was the virulent strain of bacteria in the wound that was reacting badly. It was decided that it would be best if the eye was removed immediately to save the rest of my face. They were keeping me overnight to monitor the wound, make sure they got all the bacteria out, make sure the wound was healing properly as well. I remember laying there before I drifted off, trying to come to terms with my new vision and wondering how different my life would be with only one eye. When I drifted off, I was suddenly greeted by something terrible. I was looking through a single eye, staring up at a red, unbroken sky the color of old flames. Long runners of fire, falling stars they looked like, were cascading down, and I could hear a thundering as my point of view shook with the near-constant vibration. I was low, making me think I was less than an inch tall, and though I could look around, I couldn't move. Things were moving around me, though, creatures of perverted geometry. They lumbered about as though every step pained them greatly. As I watched them, something long and spidery, like a needle with wings, descended on me, its long proboscis growing as it landed astride my point of view. As the needle came down towards me, I woke up screaming. The nurses tried to calm me down, telling me I had just had a nightmare, and I tried to drift back off to sleep, visions of that smoldering place still in my head. The next time I closed my eyes, I was staring up at that crimson sky again. The fire was still raining down, but now I was staring at an absolute horror of a creature as it cocked its head in a nearly feline curiosity. It looked almost skeletal, like a Halloween decoration that moved a little too well. As I watched it, it scuttled a little closer, stalking my point of view. Its eye sockets were bare, I thought, but the closer it got, the better I could see a pair of bright yellow pinpricks in the depths of those cavernous sockets. Its ink-black tongue would flick out every now and again, so it could moisten its seemingly bony lips. It was skulking in on 6 strangely jointed legs, and it reminded me of Toothless from the How to Train Your Dragon movies. Well, Toothless's skeleton, at least. It cocked its head as it towered over me, but when it opened its mouth, I felt another scream break through my sleeping lips. Its mouth was like a garbage disposal full of teeth, 2 sets spinning in a circular buzzsaw pattern as it hissed and screamed at me. The screams could have broken glass, and my ears actually started bleeding as it screeched over me. The head snapped down, strange teeth covering my point of view, and I woke up to 2 orderlies restraining me. That's when someone stuck a needle in my neck, and I was left in a mercifully dreamless sleep. But dreams, it seems, were the least of my worries that night. I was treated to that same sky, that same damn amber sky, until the drugs wore off. In that time, I saw those lumbering giants make their way across the blasted land. I saw human beings, too, as they made their way across the blasted land, some of them trampled by the lumbering behemoths, or hunted and maimed by those skeletal horrors. Little burnt tan creatures, almost like frogs that had learned how to walk, capered about, shoving and kicking at the naked, stumbling humans that walked about confusedly. Their skin was seared, their bodies bleeding, but no matter what happened to them, they just kept screaming and writhing in endless pain. The vision went on, an endless hell that I was forced to watch as the world on the other side moved on. I don't know if it was heaven or hell, but the only thing that remained the same was the crimson sky and the burning rain. The rest of that day, I was kept in a medical-induced state, living in that hell and seeing its atrocities. In that time, it felt as though I slept for years. Time had no meaning in that place, and the lumbering beasts became a sort of rude clock for me. They would lumber by periodically, and I would mark that as an hour. Their footsteps would shake the ground, making my peripheral shudder, and my vision felt like ripples on a pond. Of the strange skeletal creatures, there was very little to see after the first one. None of them approached me again. The mosquito creatures kept their distance as well. I suppose they hadn't found me particularly tasty, so they were content to leave me alone. That was until one of the little brown creatures came to investigate. I'd been staring at that amber sky for 2 passes of the lumbering beasts when a face that only a mother could love swam up out of the void. It was so sudden that I yelped internally, not really sure what to do now that something living had come close again. Nothing had come to bother me for so long that I had begun to think my position was going to remain this dull little space until I eventually came out of this state. The ugly, lumpy creature bent down, bringing its face very close to my position, before wrapping a hand around me and bathing me in far too welcoming darkness. Light peeked through the fingers as we ran, but that seemed to be the point where the drugs were beginning to wear off, and I started to come out. I squinted my remaining eye at the heavy rays of the afternoon sun, and felt my stomach rumble at the tray that set before me. When the nurse came in, smiling, as she watched me eat, I asked her how long I had been out for. I expected it to be a week, maybe a month, but she told me it had been about 12 hours. It felt as though I had spent years in that terrible place, counted out days' worth of hours by the passing of the creatures, and I felt that I never wanted to go back there again. I wasn't sure if it was the act of sleeping or just the act of closing my eyes, but I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself from sleep. That wasn't particularly hard. I had been asleep for 12 straight hours. But as the night wound on, that feeling of heavy eyelids became harder and harder to ignore. The TV shows became a little less stimulating, the bed became a little more comfortable, and my head began to dip and slide towards my chest. They wouldn't let me have any coffee for some reason, no stimulants at all, and the water was cutting it not at all. I made it till just after sunrise, somehow, but as I slipped into unconsciousness, I was greeted with something worse than I could have ever imagined. As I slipped off, I was treated to the worst vision yet. I was sitting high up now, in a throne room straight from the mind of Wes Craven. When they speak of otherworldly geometry and Lovecraft, I have to believe they've seen this place. Nothing was equal, nothing congruent. The angles hurt to look at. The edges were like razor blades, and the building was either made by a madman or someone who was driven mad by its construction. When you read this, you won't understand, but I ask you to try. The room looked like it was designed to inspire anxiety, foster nightmares, put the inhabitants on edge until madness swallowed them whole. The whole room was a dirty white. It wasn't off-white. It wasn't a dark white. It was a filthy white. I had seen the way windows look when they're caked with mud, and that was this color. It made my skin crawl, or it would have if I'd had any skin at that moment. The color was throughout. The feeling it gave me, coupled with the anxiety from the construction I was now inside of, made me want to shudder and vomit at the same time. It was filled with pews, which were piled with the muddy frog creatures I'd seen before. They were all manner of sizes, their lumpy bodies pressed into those seats as they sat there in rapture of me, it seemed. They were dressed strangely in garments I can only describe as fancy rags, and as I watched, the show began. A line of naked, screaming people were dragged forward, unclothed brown creatures prodding them with sticks as they looked at me in horror. These people were in terrible shape. The best among them were bruised and dirty, but some of them were lucky to be standing. I could see bodies burned down to the white meat, bones poking from them, eyes and limbs missing. But the most horrifying part was how these injuries didn't seem to bother them. They were filthy and afraid, but I got the feeling that their injuries were secondary in their mind. As the first one was pushed towards me, the brown creature opened its mouth and spoke with a voice like a well filled with water. "We have rounded up these cattle for punishment, my lord." I was confused as the dark-haired man who was roughly my age stumbled forward, but I wouldn't have long to revel in that lack of knowledge. "Who dares to trespass within my realm?" I heard it and turned, though I had no body. I was held aloft on a pedestal, and the creature beside me seemed to be my captor. It was beyond all earthly description, but I will try. Imagine one of those Jim Henson Skeksis had all the skin burned off of it, down to the bone, and then had the flesh reapplied badly with red and brown Play-Doh. Its eyes were piss-yellow slits. Its jaws were beak-like and sharp-looking, and its flesh appeared to be oozing as it spoke in a thick, deep voice like a frog at the bottom of a ravine. It spoke to the brown creatures, telling them how they wanted the people tortured, and then, suddenly, it noticed me. Turning its head, it smiled as it saw me looking at it, and its pleasure was even worse than its anger somehow. "See what awaits you, human. Witness and despair." It croakingly hissed out these words at me. I came awake, screaming again, and thankfully, they didn't put me under this time. I've been in the restraints for 4 days now. They transferred me to a psychiatric ward, and the straps were to stop me from digging at my skin. I've been awake for 4 days, refusing to go to sleep because every time I nod off, I'm returned to that hateful place. I gaze upon that creature as he passes judgment, never sleeping, never leaving, and I wake up screaming. I've begged my doctors not to sedate me, but I think they will before long. I'm writing this under heavy supervision, trying to explain to my doctors since words seem to have failed me. I'm hoping he understands that, despite my state, I don't want to hurt myself. I've seen what lies beyond, and it's It's not something I'm in any hurry to get to. Evening. Oof. I don't know what you'd call that kind of horror, but anything involving the eyes is usually a no-go for me. I like my eyes intact and exactly where they are. This next story is about someone who purchases an item that gives them a look at a strange other world that they might not be prepared for. So let's do a little research on the colors of fear. When I came home from work and saw the package on the front porch, I was filled with an irrational flood of joy. You would have thought I'd received something spectacular, and to me, I had. I'd been waiting for 5 days for Amazon to send the package, and as I brought it inside and cut the tape, I couldn't wait to see how it looked. Reaching into the buffer pads, I pulled out not a game or a new Funko Pop, but a single light bulb and a package that seemed bigger than it should have needed to be. Not just any light bulb, however, but one of those color-changing LED light bulbs. I'd seen them on TikTok and thought they looked cool. They would go through a whole spectrum of colors thanks to the little remote they came with, and I thought the whole operation looked very soothing. I like to watch people lay in bed as the colors shifted, and I thought it might help with my recent mood. I'd been experiencing some heavy seasonal depression lately, and the inclusion of some colored lights might be just what I was missing. I read the instructions and installed the bulb in my ceiling fan, and smiled as I looked at the little remote in my hand. There were so many colors to choose from, and I felt a giddy sense of anticipation. Which one should I try first? Red? Maybe blue? I settled on a light and buttery yellow as I lay in my bed. I felt like I was in some kind of sun. The ones I'd drawn as a kid, it seemed. The yellows were thick, the shade of melted crayons, and I was happy as I lay beneath it in my single room. It had been hard to get out in the cold lately, and this made me feel like I was at the park, under the warm sun at the beach, maybe. It wasn't actually warm, but I could trick my mind into thinking that it was, at least. I lay there for a few minutes, just soaking up the faint sunlight before I got up and went to my computer. As I logged into World of Warcraft for a little gaming, I looked at the remote and decided on a different color. As I explored in the game, I changed the colors to depend on where I was going. The rusty red of Orgrimmar, the deep green of Stranglethorn, the light blue of the Undercity, back to the sunny yellow for the Barrens, and so on and so on. The bulb had a color for every occasion, it seemed, and I really enjoyed playing with it as the evening progressed. I fell asleep that night under the soft, dark blue of a night sky, and I slept better than I had in a long time. In my downtime the following week, I found myself playing with the light, trying out the different colors. I discovered a button for mixing colors and found myself making color combinations that turned my room into all kinds of different shades. I found I liked a few of them. The blue and green combination reminded me of the undersea videos I'd seen on Discovery Channel when I was a kid. There was a red and yellow of the deep desert, the purple-blue of icy peaks, and I found myself lying in bed some evenings after work and just trying different combinations. I fell asleep on Thursday night, the soft blue and deep purple making me think of glaciers, and woke up to a nightmare. I opened my eyes and found myself floating in a room that looked smeared with blood. The walls seemed to hold strange shadows, the reds and blacks mingling like filth in a morgue. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst were the creatures. They were dirty white that was almost translucent, their eyes like lamps as they stared at my prone form. I wasn't sure what to make of them at first, and I wondered if I was dreaming. If I was, this was the most realistic dream I had ever had. Their bodies were long and narrow, like pale reeds, and other than their eyes, they seemed devoid of features. There were two of them, one in the corner by my desk and the other perched in the junction of the ceiling and wall. We stared at each other for some undeterminable amount of time, and I was nearly convinced that I was actually dreaming when my phone chirped and lit up on the nightstand. All three of us looked at the light, and when I looked back at them, the one in the corner of the ceiling had dropped soundlessly onto the floor. The skin around the bottom of his head seemed to rip open to reveal a double row of buttery yellow teeth. His fellow creature did the same, and as the two stalked closer to me on their noodly-looking arms, I whimpered and reached for the bat that I kept beside my bed. As I turned, I must have rolled over on the remote. As the bulb changed back to the same buttery yellow I had basked in on the first day, I came up with the bat out in front of me to find the room devoid of nightmare creatures. I turned it back to the normal fluorescence and looked around in a panic, trying to figure out what had just happened. I was still awake when the sunrise lit the windows, and I wasn't sure I'd ever sleep again with the image of those creatures thumping around in my head. I tried to get about my morning routine, getting ready for work and getting breakfast together, but the image of those horrible things would never leave me. They followed me through my day, dogging my steps as I tried to get my work done, but by lunch, I was a mess. When my boss saw me in the break room, my shaking hands struggling to open my lunch bag, she told me I looked ill and said I should go home and get some rest. "You look ill, dear. Take the day off and have a good weekend. We'll see you Monday." I told her that wasn't necessary, but she insisted. I was grateful for the chance to get some rest, but I found my anxiety growing as I got home, the same place I had seen those horrors. I checked the corners where I had seen them, hoping to find some sign that it had just been a dream, and I was rewarded with nothing. There were no marks on the eggshell white walls, no signs of claws or dirt from the filthy skin of the creatures, but it did little to soothe me. Sign or not, I knew I hadn't been dreaming, and that meant that these things had to be real. The idea that I couldn't see them, that they only existed in the dark, was even more terrifying. But despite my fears, the need to find out what they were and how they had disappeared without any sign just wouldn't leave me. I started by just turning off the lights, but I didn't think that would do much good. I'd woken up in the dark plenty of times, and I'd never seen anything like those creatures. No, I thought, it had to have something to do with that light that I had seen covering the walls. It had changed when I rolled onto the remote, and whatever combination I had bumped had allowed me to see the creatures. I knew about things that you couldn't see with the naked eye, things that were too small or hard to see outside the right color spectrum, and I wondered if these creatures were like that. More importantly, if I could only see them in that spectrum, then was it a two-way street? Could they only see me when that spectrum was on? Might explain why they didn't attack me otherwise. I didn't want to see them. The thought of looking at them terrified me, but I was curious as well. The thought of them followed me as surely as the creatures might, and I needed to be sure of what they were. I was no scientist, not by a long shot, but my desire for answers was greater than my self-preservation in this case. I started playing with different color combinations on the remote, my bat always at the ready. Before you ask, I tried red and black, but gave me something like a desert cave more than anything. The remote was small, but if you held the buttons, the colors would change further. They would get darker or lighter. They might even change depth and perception, and the combinations really were vast. My computer sat untouched that weekend, my books and TV left to catch dust, and by Sunday, I was a mess. Hadn't slept much that weekend. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see were the faces of the monsters that stalked me, and my rest was pretty thin. When someone knocked on my door, I jumped and looked around fitfully. I peeked down the hallway as someone knocked again, and when Debbie called my name, I realized it wasn't the monsters trying to trick me out of my little cocoon. I didn't even realize I wasn't dressed for company until I made it to the door. I was in clothes that my mother would have called grubs, and my hair was loose and unwashed. I likely smelled. I hadn't showered since Friday morning, and was extremely self-conscious as I opened the door to my apartment. Debbie smiled, bundled up against the cold, and when she saw the state of me, she came right in and asked what was wrong. "Wendy said you had been sent home on Friday with some kind of illness, and I see why now. You look terrible. It's not the COVID, is it?" she said, pulling her scarf up over her nose and mouth. "No, I'm not actually sick," I admitted. "Then what's going on? Have you been sleeping okay? Here." She took egg drop soup out of a bag and set it on the couch. "I brought you your favorite sick soup to help you get past this." I smiled, realizing that I hadn't eaten since the night before, when that delicious steam hit my nose. Bless her. Debbie was a true friend. As we sat, Debbie had brought dumplings to go along with the soup. I told her about the weird creatures that I had seen. Unlike me, Debbie looked excited at the prospect of seeing something different. Debbie was into things like ghost hunting and cryptids, and she loved the idea of actually getting to see one. "Oh my gosh, you gotta let me help. Come on, we'll have a picnic in your room. If this is making you sick, I want to help you see it through." I was glad for her help, but I didn't want to get her caught up in the same crap I was likely getting caught up in. Debbie was my best friend, and the thought of the creature getting her too, all thanks to my damn curiosity, was something I would rather avoid. Debbie, however, was not taking no for an answer. We took the food to my room, and I showed her the remote and the bulb. Debbie scratched her chin as she looked at the buttons, asking if I was sure it was red and black, as she started working through the settings. When I woke up, it was definitely red and black, but it was different. It was greasy looking, ethereal, not quite real. It was like a dream. That's why it took me so long to realize I was awake. Debbie started changing the colors in quick succession, the colors dancing as they went through the spectrum. I was afraid she would burn it out, the colors changing too quickly for my liking. But she just shook her head at me. She said it was fine. They were meant to sustain these kinds of things, and it would speed it up if she just kept flipping through. So we sat there, eating and flipping the lights at an almost nauseating pace for the next few hours. The sun went down and the moon came up, and as I lay on the bed and played on my phone, I realized it was almost midnight suddenly. I had to go back to work the next day, and I told Debbie I needed to get to bed. "Look, I appreciate your help, but I've got to be up early in the morning." Just a little more," Debbie said, the lights still dancing by. I know I can do it." I rolled over and shook my head, reaching for the remote. "Look, I appreciate your help, but I just don't think it can be done." She moved a little away, still flipping through the colors as I reached, and as I came off the bed, she scuttled a little further back. "Come on, just a little longer. You can be a little tired tomorrow in exchange for a good night's sleep, right?" "No, Debbie, I'm tired. I need to..." I grabbed the remote, Debbie pulling back, and that's when it fell over us. I don't know how, but we were both suddenly enveloped in the aura of dirty red and black light. The walls oozed like fresh blood. The dark hung around them like smog, and I was suddenly aware that we weren't alone. There were more than two this time, their numbers nearly a dozen, as they clung to the walls and the ceiling like grisly insects. Debbie's mouth hung open, her scream stuck midway up her throat, and I realized this had likely not been what she was expecting. As their mouths split their faces, their teeth huge, my hand shook and my stomach dropped. They fell on us then, and I rolled under the bed without thinking. Debbie's scream came out, loud and strong, and I pulled my knees to my chest as I tried to think about what to do. They were killing her. They were killing my best friend, and the only thing I could think of was changing the lights back. It had worked the first time. Maybe it would work now. I looked around, finding the remote on the ground, but as I reached for it, I saw the giant yellow eyes find me. One of those noodly arms came reaching for me, and as my fingers found the plastic face, I pushed the first button I could find and snatched it away from the sharp teeth of the creature. The light turned to something like normal before it popped loudly, and I was left in darkness. I got out my phone and switched on the flashlight, looking around and finding nothing but the ruined remains of our picnic. By the light of my phone, I discovered that the creatures were gone, but I also discovered that Debbie was gone, too. I've ordered another light bulb, but it won't arrive until tomorrow. I paid for express shipping, but I don't know if that'll be soon enough to save Debbie. I don't want to see those things ever again, but if there's a chance that Debbie's still alive, I have to find her. She wanted to help me, and now it's my turn to try and help her. So be careful with your new light bulbs if you buy one. You may see more than you bargained for, and you may lose more than just the cost of shipping.
Makes you want to think twice before you order that very special deal on Temu, doesn't it? Coming up next, we have a portal that opens after a strange and ill-fated cup of coffee maybe pulls the veil back and shows the drinker something he might have been unaware of. Let's hear a story about my favorite, black coffee.
I don't know what I'm going to do. They won't stop pounding on the door. They won't stop calling my name. And before long, someone with keys is going to come along and unlock my office. I don't know what to do. Completely out of my element here. And all my brain can come back to is that coffee. The coffee. The goddamn coffee. First cup of the morning? He'd asked. And all I could do was smile at him. He must be new. Because if he'd been here longer than a week, he'd know how often I show up to this machine. I stood before the coffee pot like a worshiper at the altar, and as the savory black liquid spilled into the pot, I felt my mouth water at the thought of coffee. First cup. Yeah, right. I started my day with the taste of warm, fresh brewed coffee. As I'd cooked my breakfast, I'd had another, savoring this one a little, as I never did the first cup. And as I sat down to catch up on my emails, I drank a third as I ate my breakfast. I'd had another one on the way to work, savoring the aroma as I sat in traffic, and now it was time to get a cup before I sat down for another day of work. First cup. Try fifth. I've been like this since my late teens. My mother was a career nurse who drank coffee by the pot, not the cup. As a single mother trying to keep up with an active son, there was never a time I can't remember when coffee wasn't part of our lives. When I was just a tyke, my mom was always running late due to my inability to get moving in the morning. No one wants to lose their job because their kid can't get ready on time, so one morning, she gave me a sippy cup of coffee, sweetened with milk and sugar. No surprise, I took to it like a fish to water. The other parents looked at her funny when she told them. She heard the usual sermons about how coffee would stunt my growth and make me hyper, but she always felt she knew better. The fact that I was never prone to hyperactivity and grew to top out about 6 feet seemed to have proven their worries were groundless. Coffee is life for me. It runs through my veins, and I always joke that when I die, I'm going to donate my body to Starbucks so I can be their flavor of the month. That cup looks a little rough, don't you think? I turned to see Chuck wander into the break room then, unrecognizable health smoothie in his My Body is a Temple shaker cup. The new guy greeted him as he came in, and I extended my hand for a fist bump. As he met my knuckles with his, I couldn't help but shudder a little at how scaly and clammy his skin always is. You'd think with all that rabbit food he ate that those healthy shakes would make his skin a little softer, or at least clear up his skin condition. It's got character, Chuck, unlike whatever you're drinking there. Chuck laughed.
if character is what you call mushrooms growing in the bottom of that thing. He was right. Not about the mushrooms, but about the state of my cup. I'd had this cup for 3 years, and in that time, I had never once bothered to wash it. The outside was a little stained up, but otherwise looked pretty normal. The inside, however, was a dark cauldron of old coffee stains and filth. It didn't look that bad to me, but, of course, I had gotten used to it by now. I always justified it by telling myself that I was putting boiling water into it, so anything living in there was likely to get boiled out of existence by the time I got around to drinking the coffee. I had no idea what I was setting myself up for. The hot liquid splashed into the cup with a luxuriant sound. I swirled the contents around in the cup before taking a test sip and gasping in pain. It was much too hot, but I had known that already. I talked with Chuck a few more minutes, and when Mr. Ryan strode into the break room, we all said our goodbyes and left for our desk. Mr. Ryan's was a fantastic boss, but he had a very narrow opinion on dawdling and socializing on company time. I said hi to a few other people in my hall and stopped at Rob's door to pass a few words. He was hard at it already, and I could see his tongue sticking out through his teeth, a nervous habit he said he'd had since elementary school. His dark hair looked sweaty, and when I asked him if he was okay, he said he had to make an 8 o'clock deadline, but maybe he could catch up at lunch. I said that sounded great, and as I walked to my office, I saw that Lisa was already behind her computer as well. Lisa was a mousy new girl that had moved into the office across from mine a few months ago. She was about my age, with straight brown hair that she always piled neatly on her head, and she had a cute pair of black glasses that were constantly needing to be pushed up the bridge of her nose. She didn't say much, but we waved at each other most mornings, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't have just a little bit of a crush on her. She waved back, smiling in her shy way, and went back to work as I stepped into my office and closed the door. I sat the coffee on my desk and turned on my computer as I prepared to start another day. I'm an IT specialist, so my job is mostly fixing other people's problems. There was an email already from Janice about how her monitor wouldn't come on, and another from Steven about how his issues with the network had gotten out of hand again. I sipped my coffee as I read these, testing the hot liquid with my lips before committing to the sip. I reached for the phone so I could call Janice. Janice was a frequent caller. The IT guy before me had thought it was funny to give her the most ancient of our relic computers. I'd been keeping that dinosaur running for years now, and every time the budget committee told me they didn't have enough money for a new computer, I died a little inside. I called Steven, and after a few questions, it became apparent that his problem was of his own making again. He'd opened another questionable email, and now his computer wouldn't link to the network. That was by design. Steven was notorious for opening anything that found its way into his inbox. He'd brought the network down several times with this sort of behavior, and I logged in remotely to revert it to a previous state, which solved the problem. The virus hadn't been that aggressive, it seemed, and he thanked me for helping him. I reached for my cup and found that it was empty. I'd been sipping the coffee while I was on the phone with Steven, and I'd drank more than expected, I guess. I called Janice and asked her what was going on with her computer, and after a few sentences, I reached into the drawer and found a new power cord. The computers seemed to burn through them for some reason, and I'd recently made a note to keep them in stock. I locked my computer, grabbed my coffee cup, and figured I'd stop for a fresh cup on the way to Janice's office. I stepped out into the hallway, turned left, and stopped dead in my tracks. My cup shattered on the carpeted floor, and that drew the creature's attention at the end of the hallway. It was hideous. It had a bulbous gray head that was covered in coarse black hair, and the small white eyes that dotted its head were awful looking. Its jaw lolled open to reveal a mouthful of sewing needle teeth and a flicking red tongue that constantly moved over them. It was dressed in a white button-up shirt and a pair of black slacks, but the shirt bulged with coarse black hair, and the pants looked to be barely containing its oddly shaped legs. It looked at me, and for a second, eyes blinked in an odd succession before it raised a hand to ask if I was okay. I shuddered and felt my knees unhinge as I slid to the wall. It sounded like Rob. Rob's voice was coming out of this creature's mouth,
And as it did, I could feel my mind slipping a little. What the hell was going on? Had I been drugged? Were they playing a trick on me? As the rob creature made its way up the hall, I saw another thing stick its head out of the break room. It looked like an enormous bat head stuck in a business suit, and in one clawed, scaly hand, it held something that looked like Chuck's smoothie shaker. He didn't even look real. The creature looked like a photorealistic movie monster, or images from a horror site when someone has drawn creatures that just look a little too real. As the rob creature got closer, I could see small sores on its skin, long curly hairs sprouting in places between its eyes, and I felt a scream ripping its way up my throat. The Chuck creature blinked his two big eyes at me. "What's wrong? You okay?" It came blundering out of the break room and towards me, and I felt my legs finally take orders as I backpedaled towards the exit door. It was 30 feet away, down several hallways, but I felt like I was motivated enough to run a mile in a minute flat. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong, and until I knew what was going on, I wasn't sure I could trust any of my senses. I had come to my office door when my back met resistance, and I realized I had bumped into someone. I turned my head woodenly to see what new horror I had blundered into, and I felt a fresh scream rip through me. It was a spider, a giant spider, but with a body on top of its abdomen like some fantasy creature from a video game. Its torso was vaguely feminine, breasts poking from beneath a blue cardigan that hung over its shoulders. Its 8 chitinous legs clicked on the floor as it took a step backwards to assess me. It looked at me with familiarity, and I could see that it had shiny black hair piled on its head above its 8 rotating eyes. 2 eyes seemed to be covered by thin metal glasses, and I blundered towards my door as I realized who it was. The spider thing was Lisa. "Sorry, are you okay? I didn't mean to." I didn't let her finish. I pushed my way into my office and slammed the door behind me. I locked the handle, pushed my chair under it, and cringed against the farthest wall I could get to. What in the hell was going on? Had that been real? What was I seeing out there? That couldn't be my colleagues, could it? They had sounded like them, even sort of acted like them, but the creatures out there had been so nightmarish that I couldn't even process it. All I could do was huddle under my desk, knees pulled up to my chest, and try not to cry as someone knocked on the door. "You okay in there?" It was Chuck. "You scared Lisa half to death, man. I think she's crying in her office right now. Maybe you could come apologize?" I stiffened. Lisa was crying. Had I done that? I couldn't bear the thought that I had made Lisa cry. I had half risen from under my desk when I'd finally gotten a hold of myself again. This wasn't real. The monsters were trying to trick me so they could get me out of my office. I sat back down under my desk and squeezed my knees against my chest again. They wouldn't trick me like that. I wasn't going to be fooled so easily. Chuck banged on the door, harder this time, and asked what my problem was. Rob's voice made an appearance as well, and he apologized for startling me. They were worried about me and wanted me to come out so they could sort through this. They were scared for me and wanted to see me. They got angry at how I was acting and started banging louder all the while. I just huddled under my desk and sobbed quietly. I couldn't process what was going on or why this was happening. And all the avenues seemed to come back to the coffee. Someone had drugged me. Someone was messing with me. Someone had done this to make me freak out. But why? That was when the phone rang. It jangled merrily in the cradle, unaware of the horror show that was just outside the door. I looked up over the edge of my desk like a cartoon mouse peeking out of his hole. I almost expected the phone to grow fangs or sprout eyes, but it didn't. It just continued to be an average black plastic phone. I reached out shakily for it, and as my sweaty hands settled around it, I felt it solidify and had second thoughts about my perception. My desk was still here. My computer still hummed peacefully. If this was a world for monsters, then how could all these things exist? How would a monster type with big clawed hands? How would he sit in a normal chair? How would he pick up the phone? As I picked up the phone, I heard Mr. Ryan's calm voice wash over me. It took me a minute to realize that he was calling my name as I was just sitting there in the calm warmth of my realization. "Hello, sir?" I said, and my voice shook a little. "Are you okay?" His voice was calm and rich and made me feel like control had been restored. I don't know, sir. I'm seeing some weird stuff. Have you imbibed any substances today? It's okay if you have. I just want to know how we can help you. I just had a cup of coffee in the break room and coffee at home. I was fine when I got here, sir, and now I don't know what's going on. I'll be there in a few minutes. Just wait. And he hung up before I could tell him about the monsters. I hung up the phone and sat huddled under my desk. He wouldn't be able to get here, not with the monsters out there, and even if he could, would he be normal? Maybe this was just another trick by the monsters. I sat under my desk, shuddering and waiting for the creatures to break down my door and get me. They had stopped banging and shouting, but I could still hear them scuttling around out there. They were waiting, just waiting for me to drop my guard. Then they'd have me. 4 loud knocks made me jump and hit my head on the desk. "It's Mr. Rhines. Open the door, please, so we can talk about this." I slunk from under my desk, looking for all the world like a scared rabbit as I approached the door like I thought it might explode. Are the monsters gone?" He didn't answer right away, probably hoping he had misheard me. "Monsters?" I put my mouth close to the door jamb and whispered, "The monsters are out in the hall." No monsters. Why don't you let me in so we can talk about all this and get everything straightened out? Your friends and co-workers are worried about you and are anxious to get this sorted out. My hand shook as I set it on the doorknob. I must have been wrong. Maybe I'd just had a psychotic incident or something. Now everything was back to normal. I had acted like an ass and scared the hell out of everyone. It was time to go face the music, maybe find out what all this was about, and as I wrapped my hand around the knob, I was sure that everything would be back to normal when I opened the door. As the door came open, the worst horror of all was waiting for me. He was a demon. His skin was the color of burnt pork and was awash with cracks and blisters that opened and oozed as he stood before me. His hands were cruel claws sprouting from the cuffs of his Armani suit, and his wings extended like a miasma behind him. His face was a wide, lolling mouth, eyeless and earless, with a massive set of ram's horns that curled above the door jamb as he hulked in it. When he opened his mouth, I heard the voice of Satan himself, the lilting voice that invited Eve to eat an apple, and I knew that I would never be able to deny him if he spoke. Now, let's see what all this is. I slammed the door in his face, and they've been banging at it for nearly 30 minutes. So here I sit, writing my experience in the hopes that someone will take something from this before they burst through the door and get me. As I write, though, a sobering feeling has occurred to me. There's a mirror in my desk. As I write this, I can't help but look at the drawer and fight the urge to pull it out. As I sit here panicked, afraid that I have somehow found myself in a world of monsters, I never stop to think that maybe the problem is me. Maybe I've lived inside a delusion my whole life. Something in that odd cup of coffee triggered me to see the world for what it really is. Could it be possible that if I were to take that mirror out and look at myself, I could see my own scales and fangs and slime as well? Could it be that somehow the veil has been pulled away and I'm finally seeing the world for what it really is? I guess the lesson here is this: maybe a little soap and water is cheaper than the loss of your own sanity, and maybe I should have listened when they told me to clean my damn cup. You just never know what you might find at the bottom of that delicious cup of coffee. Coming up next, we have someone who finds something odd in a house
that he's fixing up. Someone whose life may be taking a very different turn after he discovers something creeping in through an unfinished wall. So, let's learn a little bit more about the Black Spot.
I won't go back to work tomorrow. I don't care what Jack says and how much he threatens to tell my probation officer. I will not hear the way my coworkers laugh at me. They tell me it's nothing, but they didn't see what I saw. They haven't seen the spot like I did today. Yeah, I did a little time. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not going to bullshit anybody and tell them a lie. I got a little too drunk one night and assaulted someone in a bar. It was my first offense, and I did my 2 years without much hassle. Hell, they even let me do the last year at work release, so I could keep paying my parents' mortgage for them. I have experience in construction, so it was a good fit. They set me up with a crew, doing drywall and laying flooring, and I worked for a good bunch of guys. It was a sweet gig, and it was a gig I was told I could keep after I got released. On the day I was released, I told them I'd see them in a few days and rejoin the real world. That, however, was the night my dad suffered a stroke. It was a bad one. Mom woke me up screaming, and we took him to the hospital in the back of an ambulance. Suddenly there were doctors to talk to, changes to make to the house I'd grown up in, and a man who'd once taken care of me to take care of. He'd lost function in nearly half his body, and with Mom feeling very overwhelmed, it became my job to take care of Dad. It wasn't until my probation officer informed me that I was in danger of violating my probation that I realized it had been almost a month since I'd been released. I understand that you've got some things going on, but you have to maintain employment as part of your probation. Your job with a construction firm says that they'll let you come back if you're still interested, but you have to have some income coming in by next week or risk violating your probation and going back to prison. I went to the foreman the next day to see if I could get my old job back, but it appeared I was in for a surprise. Yeah, sorry, we filled your spot on that crew. We didn't know if you were coming back, and we needed a full crew for the job. I gritted my teeth and resisted the urge to rage at him. Then why did you tell the probation officer I could come back? 'Cause I have a new crew for you, if you're still interested in it. I told him I was, and he gave me a number to call. That's Jack. He's been begging for another able body. Give him a call and see if you guys can meet up today. I thanked him, inwardly fuming that he'd already filled my position, and called the number. Jack answered on the third ring and told me that his crew left at 5 a.m. If I wanted a spot on it, I'd better be on the yard at 5 a.m., ready to work. I told him I would, and he hung up on me mid-sentence. I already didn't have a good feeling about this guy. He was terse, and didn't sound like the kind of guy you wanted to have a beer with after work. Regardless, I needed the work, so I set my alarm the night before and dragged up before dawn to meet this asshole at the yard at 5 a.m. And oh boy, had I been right in my hunch about this guy. Jack was one of those average-sized dudes who thinks he's a giant, the kind of guy who gets his ass beat in prison. He wore jeans and a sleeveless t-shirt, with a gold chain that hung down into his thick chest hair. His hair was held in place with enough grease to change the oil in my car, and I saw him single me out the second I showed up. He had a small crew, maybe 10 guys, but the way he zoned in on me let me know that he'd been looking for me. Well, you actually showed up. Rick may speak highly of you, but I'm not just going to drop somebody down so some ex-con can have a job. You'll be cleaning the job site until I'm convinced that you're not going to show up high or just dip out in the middle of the day. If that's not okay with you, then you're going to go tell your probation officer to send you back where you came from. He turned and walked away, the crew piling into his truck as I stood there in stunned silence. I had to remind myself that I needed this job as I piled into the back of the truck with them. I had to remind myself a lot over the next few hours that Mom and Dad needed me home and not back in prison. We pulled up outside this dumpy-looking house in the suburbs just as the sun started to come up over the horizon. It was an old 2-story with a peeling exterior, and a yard that looked like it had last been mowed during the Bush administration. They had made a pathway up to the walk so that they could bring in their tools, and the grass looked stomped flat by the constant traffic. They had set up a generator near the porch, and a big metal dumpster created an island in the grass where they had just rolled it off and dropped it. All in all, it was a sloppy-looking sight, but I was in no position to throw stones. Jack collected us up on the porch so he could give out assignments. The old house was being renovated so the company could flip it, and he set several of us to ripping up carpet. After assignments were given, Jack and 3 others went upstairs to assess the damage, and I didn't see them come back until after lunch. I was set to pulling carpet in the downstairs living room. It was a dingy little room with a pair of small windows that reminded me of eyes. The carpet was disgusting, covered in hair and crumbs, and it was tacky like old soda had been spilled on it. I was sliding on my gloves when someone threw a crowbar on the floor and walked off. "Hey, aren't you going to help me?" I asked, but the guy who tossed the crowbar just shook his head. "We each get a room. This one's yours, so get to it." Then they left me to pull carpet in this big dirty room by myself. The living room wasn't huge, but it was still a lot to ask of one person. I pressed the crowbar in and pulled the carpet away from the wall, not bothering to be gentle. The drywall was going to be pulled out next, and I suddenly wondered why they were pulling the carpet out first. I shrugged. I wasn't the boss here, so I guess I'd just have to do as I was told. That was the first time I noticed the spot. It was in the corner of the living room, a big water stain that seemed to take up 2 walls. It was about the size of a basketball, and the water spot looked like it would be wet if you touched it. It kind of freaked me out, for some reason, though I couldn't tell you why at the time. As I worked, I could almost swear it was moving, just a little, and I got that feeling like eyes on the back of my neck. You know the feeling, the one that makes your hair prickle up, the one that makes you think you might be being watched. I tried not to let it bug me, but it was like I could feel that spot as I worked. The carpet didn't take too long. An hour later, I had rolled it up and was ready to haul it out. I looked around for help, but the others were still hard at it, or at least pretending to be. I could see 3 of them sitting around smoking or chatting for every one guy working. When I asked them to help me get the carpet out to the dumpster, they just scoffed and waved me off. I couldn't move it by myself, so I just left it in the living room and went to look for more carpet to pull. It seemed that my fellow workers weren't as diligent as I was, because there was still carpet in 3 rooms that seemed to need removing. I sighed. This was clearly going to be my life for a while, and I set to work pulling the carpet to get ready to haul it all out. As I worked in a bedroom, the wall painted off blue with stormy-looking clouds on it, I got the feeling that someone was watching me. I turned to the door, thinking maybe one of my coworkers had come to see who was making so much noise back here, but there was no one. I looked to the window, but it was so caked with dust that no one could have seen anything through it. I glanced over to the closet, thinking maybe someone was lurking in there, and that was when I saw the source of my discomfort. A basketball-shaped spot on the wall over the closet door. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. It was just a water spot. The house was probably full of them, and I just happened to have found one that looked exactly like the other one I had seen. I kept working, pulling up tack strips in places, but it still felt funny, like something was watching me. As the carpet rolled up, I began to push it towards the door, sending up puffs of smoke as it thumped over. As I pushed, I couldn't help but glance at that spot. It was still there, hanging over the closet door, seeming to watch me as I worked. I turned to look at it squarely and gasped as I noticed a large white hole in the middle of the spot, like an eye floating in a puddle. I ran out of the room then, bumping into another worker as I beat a hasty retreat. "There you are," he said tersely. "We've been looking for you. Come help us move this carpet." I was more than happy to oblige, anything to get out of that room, and we spent the rest of the morning hefting carpet. We pulled it to the dumpster, tossing it in haphazardly, and then assessed the work for tomorrow. As we broke for lunch, I had almost forgotten about the spot. People being around me made me feel a little crazy about being afraid of it, but as we worked, I could swear I saw it again and again. The walls were covered in stains. The pipes were likely bad, but this one was definitely the same spot. It had the same wobbly edges and deep black center as the one I'd seen the first time. The white circle was gone, though, but I still found myself looking for it when I was in a room. The guys on the crew must have noticed because they started making jokes about how prison had made me jumpy. "He's got to check all the corners when he comes in to make sure no booty bandits are lurking," a big, slovenly one in overalls would say, and they'd all laugh like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. If I didn't need this job so bad, I'd have made something of it. We moved upstairs eventually, finding 2 bedrooms and a bathroom that needed carpet or flooring removed. By 5 o'clock, we had all the carpet out of the house and in the dumpster out front. Jack came back in a truck, handing out paychecks and thanking the guys for their hard work. When he came to me, he handed me the check grudgingly, scowling the whole time and holding it when I tried to take it from him. "Tomorrow I expect some real work out of you.
not just half-assing it like you did today. I took the check and walked off. I'd find my own way back. The next day was a little better. Drac said that the drywall would come next, and then he and his cronies disappeared out to the truck while the rest of us worked. We all started tearing out drywall, dust and nails flying, and I meant to swing my hammer into that spot extra hard when I saw it. To my disappointment, though, the spot never showed up. I'd seen it everywhere yesterday, seen it in every room at least once, but today it was absent. We spent the day tearing out drywall and cleaning up after ourselves. When 5 o'clock came, we packed up and went out to get paid. Today had been better. Nothing builds camaraderie like a little hard work, and I found myself joining in on the jokes and conversation that happened in the group. We were covered in drywall dust as we walked out that afternoon, laughing about how Tony had been scared by a rat when it burst out of the drywall in the laundry room. Jack looked at them coldly, affronted that they had accepted me so easily. He handed me my check in silence, and I piled into the back of the truck with the others this time. The next day was the last day I'd get to work with them. We spent that day hanging drywall downstairs. Between the 10 of us, we worked diligently and quickly. The drywall went up a sheet at a time, something I was pretty good at, and I was glad to see it covered the hollow studs and the newly blown-out insulation. We marked a few spots where the beams were rotten, but the pipes actually looked pretty good, as did the electrical. I began to wonder what had made the spots I kept seeing. They looked so wet, but I pushed it out of my mind as I worked beside my newfound companions. By 5 o'clock, we'd done most of the downstairs, and we'd have the rest finished by tomorrow so we could move upstairs. When I walked out onto the porch, though, I realized I'd forgotten something. I had rubbed at my wrist, looking for the reassuring feel of metal that had gotten me through 2 years in the can, but I found only bare skin. My heart skipped a beat. My dad's watch was gone. When I remembered that I had laid it on the counter, not wanting it damaged while I was working, I must have forgotten all about it in the bustle. I grabbed my check and turned to go back in the house, Jack scowling at me as I walked off. "We're leaving," he called to my back, but I waved him off. "If you're gone when I get back, I'll just find my own way." I wasn't about to leave my watch here overnight. I went to the kitchen and checked the counter, but there was nothing there. It was powdery with dust from today's work, and I thought I could see an indent where the watch had been. I checked underneath the counters and around the floor, but I couldn't find my watch. I began to look around, hoping it hadn't found its way into someone else's pocket. I walked through the rooms, looking into each of them, to see if I'd maybe left it there, and when I looked into the living room, I was rewarded for my effort. Sitting in the dead center of the debris-riddled floor was my missing watch. I took a step, but something brought me up short. A little tickle on the back of my head told me that it was a little too convenient. It was like a trap baited with something for an unlucky animal to blunder into. I shook it off. I wanted my watch, damn it, and I wasn't going to just abandon it because I had a hinky feeling. I bent down to get it, wrapping my fingers around the cold metal, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was pulsating, sludgy, something that I had seen soaking into the new drywall. I looked up exasperated, figuring that someone had put a nail through a pipe at some point today. But what I saw drew me up short. I was left half bent, filled with fear, as I saw the oozy black spot seething on the drywall. It was bigger than a basketball now, its inky depth seeming to beat like a heart. As I watched, I could see 2 white circles materializing out of the soup. They rolled around like lost eggs, and finally came to rest in the middle of the sludge. I wanted to run. I didn't want to see whatever was in that thing, but I was trapped like a deer in headlights. I felt my breath hitching in my chest, and could only wait for my legs to regain their strength. The white orbs rolled around in the soup and became eyes. They blinked at me, their centers trained on me as I bent there. All at once, a Cheshire cat smile floated under them as it beamed at me. I was stuck looking into that inky hole, the edges dribbling down the fresh drywall as it oozed and ran. Suddenly I was sure that part of that darkness was ahead with the eyes that were looking out at me from whatever inky void it inhabited, maybe with hands that wanted to pull me into that dark hole it inhabited. As if it had read my mind, I saw dark hands grip the edges of the spot, trying to pull itself out and enter my world. It never lost eye contact as it pulled itself out, and I could see the vague outline of its head as it came free of the spot with that placental pop. It was all I needed to see. Suddenly my legs were moving in overtime, my heart was racing like a steam engine, and I was out the door and slamming it behind me before I could quite remember how I had gotten onto the porch. Even through the blood pounding in my ears and the rubber of my sneakers pounding on the wooden floor, something else dominated my hearing, and there was one sound that I would never forget. I may not be able to remember how I came to be on the porch, heaving and gasping for air, but I do remember the sound I heard just before I threw the door open and I was free. It was a plop and a splatter, similar to a bucket of paint being emptied on the ground. I ran home, calling Jack as I took off up the sidewalk. He picked up on the second ring. "I'm not coming back for you. I told you that I was..." "Jack, you gotta get somebody back to the site. Someone's there." "Who?" Jack asked, and I could hear his skepticism. "If this is some kind of goof, I don't get it." I told him how I had gone back for my watch and I'd seen someone skulking about the site. I didn't tell him about the oozing hole in the wall. He'd see that. However, I did tell him that I had thought the guy might be on drugs, so he should probably be careful. He was banging his fists on the drywall, so I booked it, I finished, trying to keep it believable. The crew was just starting to warm up to me, and I didn't want them to think I was a nut job. "Jesus Christ, I thought you ex-cons were tough. I'll go have a look. You just stay home. I'll let you know what I find." That was hours ago. Since I got home, I've been in my room, waiting on Jack to call, and I decided to write this while I waited. When I opened my laptop, though, my desire to get this down became all the more prevalent. As I slid it open, I caught a glimpse behind me and realized that I'll be fortunate if I have time to finish this tale. I could see a basketball-sized hole reflected in the screen of my laptop. I got up and locked the door and moved my writing to the living room. I don't know if the locked door will stop whatever may come from that dribbling hole, but I know that it may give me enough time to finish this before it breaks the surface. Keep your eyes peeled for water spots. You never know what might come slipping out.
One more story for you, and then I think it'll be time for us to say goodbye. I've saved a short one for last, but I think it's a powerful story, nonetheless. Let's hear a story about a woman who falls asleep on a long car trip and opens her eyes on a very different sort of landscape. Let's finish off with a story about strange visions.
It was one of the most frightening experiences of my life, and I honestly have no explanation for it. My boyfriend and I were on a bit of a road trip, traveling to see my parents the next state over. They had never met him, despite the two of us having dated for almost 2 years. He had proposed to me the week before, my mother seeing the pictures on Instagram, and she had asked when they were finally going to get to meet this mystery boy I intended to marry. I hated that I didn't get to see my mom as much these days. My dad and I had a bit of a falling out before I moved, but he was looking to reconcile, and I was looking for some closure before my marriage to the sweetest man I'd ever met. We were driving, the countryside sliding past, and I felt myself drifting off as I just sat there and took it in. "Feeling like a little nap, babe?" he asked, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "I think I might close my eyes for a second or two." "Well, okay. I'm going to stop for some food soon. 20 winks at the most," he joked. I stuck my tongue out at him and let my eyes slip shut as I blocked out the cows and the green fields that went sliding past the window. When I opened my eyes, the landscape was very different. The sky was red, like burnt red, the color of a jack-o'-lantern, and it seemed to be crackling with heat lightning as I watched. Something was falling from it, something bright that trailed a long tail. They almost looked like comets, but they were too close. We were on the road, but it was pitted and old. The concrete was flaked and peeling, and the landscape was eroded and rocky. Despite this, yellow crops grew from the arid soil, and I could see strange brown creatures with bloated bodies moving along on scaly legs. None of it was right. We should be traveling through Midwestern farmland, and the lightning was rumbling again. I saw it hit the ground and leave a crater amidst the too dry vegetation. I looked to Brad for some kind of answers, but as upsetting as the landscape was, Brad was the most upsetting thing about this, whatever it was. He stared ahead, eyes on the road, as he sat stock still and stared through the window as if it were completely normal. Brad? What the hell, where the hell are we? He stared ahead and said nothing. Brad, what's going on? He stared ahead, and as I watched, something seemed to move beneath his cheek. I was scared. He was so still, but I found myself unable to look away. Brad was a joker, but he didn't usually joke like this. This was different. This was making me very afraid, and I started to worry about something being wrong with him. Then, ever so slightly, he turned his head, and I found myself wishing he had just stayed facing forward. His eyes were jet black, too big and starey. His face was locked in the rictus of a smile, and it seemed he was having some sort of fit. His skin was moving, writhing, and as I watched, a large black beetle slid from his mouth and scuttled into his ear. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared at me. I became aware of how quiet it was, only the thunder making any noise as it struck outside the window, and the silence was a whole other monster that lurked. It became claustrophobic, like those parts in a horror movie where you're waiting for the monster to scream and scare you so you can just get on with the story. The scream never came. The scare never happened, and I just sat and looked at this thing as it drove us towards wherever we were going. As we sat staring at each other, however, the car was invaded by the sound of a loud, cavernous scream. I turned in time to see our vehicle barreling towards something large and gray that was walking laboriously across the road. I only saw it for a split second, but it was huge, and the thing we were careening towards was a leg that seemed to take up the whole road. Its skin was craggy, like a living mountain, and as it tried to ponderously get its bulk out of the road, we hit it squarely, and the car made a sound like an angry animal. The crash happened in slow motion. The vehicle's front crunched in, lifting us off the ground as the windshield bulged in. The bubble slowly grew before bursting, pushing inward like a rising wave. The glass shattered out like a cascade of beautiful diamonds as it pelted toward my face. Through it all, those dark eyes glared into my soul. He maintained eye contact until I woke up, screaming as the pain radiated up my face. I heard a screech of tires and an angry exclamation from my boyfriend as I came to. The car swerved back onto the road, and I clutched my nose and screamed. The pain was instant and mind-numbing, shooting agony that radiated through my nose and spread through my face. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was going on. Through my tear-streaked eyes, I could see that everything was back to the way it was before I dozed off. Had it all been a dream? My throbbing nose kind of made me think that it had been real. The pain was becoming too much, and I begged him to take me to a hospital. He obliged as best he could, and 20 minutes later, we walked into the ER lobby in the nearest town. It was a slow day, I suppose, because they let us back and asked me questions as I helped them fill out paperwork. They didn't leave us sitting in the room for long either. In no time at all, someone was taking my hand off my face, and my boyfriend was holding my arms to keep me from trying to cover it again. I wanted to cover my face again badly, my nose a white-hot ball of agony, and the touch of Brad's hand was making me shudder. I couldn't look at him, because despite knowing that it was a dream, all I could see was that bug-filled creature with dead eyes looking back at me. The doctor looked into my left nostril with a light and furrowed his brow. That's weird. Hold very still for a second. Brad held me, wrapping his body around me, which only made me shudder worse, as the doctor reached into my nose and pulled something out that seemed to cut me as it came free. My nose hurt all the worse, like it was being sliced with a razor blade, and as it came free of my nose, I could see that it had been what was causing me the pain. It glittered wetly, red drops dappling the edges of the object as it slid out into the light of day. It was a shard of glass, about as long as my pinky tip, and nearly as wide. They had a lot of questions I couldn't answer, and Brad was utterly bewildered as to how it had gotten in my nose in the first place. I can't explain it myself. It was as if I had dozed off perfectly fine and woke up with a huge piece of glass in my face. I told them about the dream, but that didn't seem to convince them in the least bit. I simply gained a giant piece of glass somehow. No one seems to be able to tell me why. That's why I'm writing this, honestly. I sent Brad out to get me some clothes from the car, but I don't know if I can even get back in the car with him. Sometimes he looks normal, but sometimes, just for a second, I can see that weird thing staring out of his face. The other subs I put this in seem to think it was a joke, but you guys seem to appreciate weird stuff, so any advice would be greatly appreciated. I just don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know if I'm going to be able to drive for another 2 hours with him. I don't know what's going on or if I'll ever get over this.
And just like that, our stories have come to an end once again. But don't fret. I'm sure there will be many more cozy horrors yet to come. Until then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.